This news story was written by Maria Sacchetti and Marianne Levine. Judge says Trump administration violated court order with South Sudan deportations. A federal judge in Massachusetts said Wednesday that the Trump administration violated a court order by attempting to deport several migrants to South Sudan and ordered U.S. officials to interview them to determine whether they have a reasonable fear of harm if they are deported to the conflict-ridden nation. The extraordinary outcome followed a contentious court hearing over the fate of the men from Cuba, Vietnam, Myanmar, Laos, and Mexico, who were hastily removed from the United States a day earlier after federal authorities determined they had committed serious crimes and their homelands would not take them back. U.S. District Judge Brian E. Murphy wrote that the hurried and confused notice the federal government had given the deportees Tuesday was unreasonable. He directed authorities to conduct screenings of the men to determine if they qualify for humanitarian protection, and stipulated they must have at least 72 hours notice ahead of the interview, as well as access to a lawyer, an interpreter, and other accommodations. Going forward, he wrote, the government must give detainees 10 days to challenge their removal to nations in which they are not citizens, and maintain the possibility of reopening their immigration cases for additional review. The judge said any deportation officer or staff member who violates his orders could face civil or criminal contempt charges. The precise number of deportees on the plane remained unclear Wednesday. The Department of Homeland Security said it deported 8 men, 7 of whom are not citizens of South Sudan. In his order, Murphy granted screening interviews to 6 men, though he did not specify which ones. He issued a separate order demanding information about another deportee, who DHS apparently decided could be returned to his native Myanmar. To be clear, this is not one of those hard cases, Murphy wrote. He also said that no reasonable interpretation of his initial order on April 18th, stipulating that the administration cannot remove migrants without sufficient notice, could justify the removals Tuesday. He wrote that the immigrants deported a day earlier had fewer than 24 hours notice and 0 business hours notice before being put on a plane and sent to a country as to which the U.S. Department of State issues the following warning. Do not travel to South Sudan due to crime, kidnapping, and armed conflict. A lawyer for the immigrants had urged Murphy earlier in the day to order the government to return the men to the United States, saying that deporting them to South Sudan, which a United Nations official recently said was on the brink of civil war, amounted to torture and a violation of federal law. Murphy agreed with the migrants' lawyers, and he said the Trump administration had unquestionably violated his previous order that federal authorities must provide sufficient notification for detainees who are to be deported to third countries in which they are not citizens, so they have time to legally challenge their removals. But the judge declined to order their return, saying only that DHS could bring them back for the interviews if it wished to do so. The government charter flight appeared to have landed near a U.S. naval base in the nearby country of Djibouti, according to publicly available flight tracking information. Accommodations for the interviews were unclear Wednesday. During the hearings that preceded the judge's order, the immigrants' lawyers had asked if Murphy would require government officials to interview the men on the airplane. At one point, the judge mused about the possibility of authorities renting a room at the Holiday Inn to conduct the interviews. A U.S. immigration official told the judge that authorities were working with the Defense Department on a possible solution. But the complicated logistics raised more questions from the migrants' legal team. One attorney, Trina Realmuto, urged the judge to order the government to return the detainees to the United States. She said they should not be punished for the government's failure to follow the court's orders, and noted that accommodating authorities who broke the rules would fail to deter them from doing it again. She emphasized that conducting screening interviews for humanitarian protection requires privacy, and argued that the detainees should have access to lawyers, asylum officers, interpreters, and research about South Sudan. Screening the men outside of the United States is a logistical nightmare, Realmuto told the judge. How are they going to present evidence that they have a reasonable fear, she said, adding that the State Department's reports on South Sudan should speak for themselves. Everyone should have a reasonable fear of going there. Murphy, appointed to the federal bench by President Joe Biden, said he understood Realmuto's concerns, but said he would grant the government's request to craft a narrowly tailored solution to their failure to follow his orders. If the department wants to figure that out, I am inclined to let them, he said of DHS. The court hearing marked the latest confrontation between the Trump administration and the federal court system over the president's efforts to ramp up his mass deportation operation. Judges have chastised federal authorities for failing to provide sufficient legal due process to deportees. In several instances, judges have ordered the administration to halt deportation flights and, in at least 2 cases, bring back migrants who were sent to a mega-prison in El Salvador. The administration has not complied with the orders to bring back the men. On Wednesday, Murphy acknowledged that, in his previous order, he had not specified the amount of notification time the government must provide to migrants before they are deported to third countries. Murphy said the Trump administration had provided plainly insufficient notice to the migrants to consult with their attorneys and investigate conditions in South Sudan to determine whether they might face torture or persecution. He said the Trump administration could elect to bring the migrants back to the United States, but otherwise could interview them where they are. One key option is for the migrants to seek protection under the Convention Against Torture, which Congress ratified in 1994 to bar the U.S. government from sending people to countries where they might be tortured. Murphy said the degree to which the administration's violation implicates criminal obstruction is for another day. Trump administration lawyers told the court that the men had undergone deportation proceedings and did not manifest a fear of being sent to South Sudan before they boarded the airplane. Justice Department lawyers Elianis Perez and Drew Ensign argued that the migrants had been given sufficient notification of their deportations. Ensign compared the situation with expedited removal, a process that is typically used at the southern border to deport recent border crossers, not people who had lived in the United States for many years. Are you telling me that the department believes that these individuals had a meaningful opportunity to object? Murphy asked. We believe so, Ensign said. At a news conference ahead of the court hearing, DHS spokeswoman Tricia McLaughlin called the deportees monsters and said all of them had been convicted of serious criminal offenses in the United States. The agency distributed printouts with their mugshots, names, and descriptions of their alleged crimes, including murder and sex offenses. McLaughlin accused the Massachusetts judge of trying to dictate the foreign policy and national security of the United States of America. She suggested that South Sudan was not the final destination for the men, though details of the destination were not listed in court records. One of the deportees, Thongse Nilakut from Laos, was convicted of fatally shooting a German tourist, Gisela Flager, and wounding her husband Klaus on May 16, 1994 in California, where they were visiting their daughter, court records show. Their daughter, Birta Flager, said she disagreed with a California parole board's decision to release Nilakut. But she said she also opposes the Trump administration's attempts to remove him without legal due process. 2 wrongs don't make a right, she said. He shouldn't have been released, but you also can't ignore due process. There's a federal judge that says the United States cannot deport someone to a third country without proper notification and a chance to object. No one wins here. Riel Muto, the lawyer for the immigrants, said even those with criminal histories cannot, under U.S. law, be sent to places where they could be persecuted or killed. Anyone who investigates the situation in South Sudan would have a fear of being placed in a war-torn country, she said. They are no less deserving from protection against torture than any other human being on the planet. Judges and plaintiffs in lawsuits against the Trump administration have accused the government of failing to comply with court orders in numerous cases, particularly those involving the administration's efforts to deport millions of migrants. The most high-profile example is that of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, an immigrant living in Maryland who government officials admitted was mistakenly deported to El Salvador, despite an immigration judge's order forbidding his removal. The U.S. Supreme Court in April ordered the administration to facilitate his return, but more than a month later he remains jailed there. In a separate case, a D.C. Circuit Court judge found probable cause that Trump administration officials were in contempt of court for violating his mid-March order to immediately return planes carrying deportees that were flying to El Salvador. An appeals court has temporarily put the contempt proceedings on hold. This week, a divided federal appeals court in Richmond upheld a lower court ruling that the Trump administration also must facilitate the return of a 20-year-old Venezuelan man who was deported to El Salvador in violation of a legal settlement. He has yet to be returned. In South Sudan on Wednesday, Dao Majak, head of the Juba International Airport, said the only deportee from the United States received in South Sudan was a Congolese refugee who arrived last month. Maybe they are hanging somewhere, Bull Ring, manager of the airport control tower in Juba, said of the 8 men the administration flew out of the United States on Tuesday. but they have not come to us. Rail Ombor in Nairobi and Justin Juvenal in Washington contributed to this report. A previous version of this article misstated the job title of Bol Ring, who is the manager of the Juba International Airport's control tower, not the manager of the airport.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, where the hell are these migrants who were legally deported to El Salvador? South Sudan. Where the hell are they? This fight will not be won by the Trump administration. As soon as Democrats take back the House in 2026, Donald Trump and his administration, starting with Kristi Noem, the piece of shit Secretary of the Homeland Security, will be probably the first evil broad to be prosecuted. And boy, I hope that they sentence her to death for illegally deporting people without due process, without the legal Fifth Amendment right, as well as in violation of court orders and legal settlements, and court orders to bring the illegally deported and kidnapped migrants back per court orders. That is going to do it for today's legal breaking reporting, or at least this legal breaking reporting, ladies and gentlemen. If you did enjoy this reporting, please, firstly, like, comment, share, subscribe, and enjoy. Secondly, if you guys want to make sure you're always up to date on all the things legal breaking reporting wise on this side of politics, please hit the bell icon as well as the all notifications option. The bell icon is located directly beneath the screen here on the right hand side of the subscribe button. Thirdly, if you guys also want to stay up to date on all the things legal breaking reporting wise on the side of politics, please follow me on my social medias that'll be linked down below in the video description. Fourthly, ladies and gentlemen, please help me reach and achieve the goal of 170 plus subscribers. The reason why I'm saying 170 plus subscribers, ladies and gentlemen, is because right after we reach and achieve the goal of 170 subscribers, we have more subscribers to reach and achieve right after we reach and achieve the goal of 170 subscribers. Fifthly, and last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, please stay positive, even though I know it's hard for the majority of you at times to, unfortunately, stay positive during these unfortunate, illegal induced darkness times caused by the illegal, unconstitutional criminality of the Trump administration, Trump regime. It's even hard for me to stay positive at times during this unfortunate, illegal induced darkness time caused by the illegal, unconstitutional Trump administration, Trump regime. And please stay safe. And know that justice will prevail on the correct side of law eventually, despite Donald Trump and his illegal, unconstitutional regime and administration's illegal, unconstitutional, unlawful executive orders, actions, and behaviors. Until my next legal breaking reporting, ladies and gentlemen, I will talk to you guys in the next reporting.